30, because we're going to be talking about this subject that you see on the screen. Now it's time. I'm going to share with you as we begin today a research study that came out of the University of California. UCLA had put in this major time doing this study that ended up with some interesting, if not startling, statistics. What they found was that the average one-year-old hears the word no 400 times a day. I want you to think about that for just a moment. Now, these well-meaning parents, siblings, grandparents, you're all thinking, what am I doing to my child? We don't just say no to that one-year-old. We say no, 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 no. And it adds up really fast, doesn't it? Interestingly enough, by the time that child hits the age of 5 years old, they have heard the word no over 200,000 times. And by the time they become a teenager, they've heard the word no over 500,000 times. And that same teenager has only heard the word yes 5,000 times. 500,000 no's, 5,000 yeses. They followed that same group of children into their 20s, and by the time they were 25 years of age, they had heard no countless times. They couldn't even keep up with the number. But the number of times they heard yes was just a minimal fraction of that amount. And up until the age of 4 years of age, children work on what is called the genius or brilliance level. And unfortunately, with so much negativity that comes to them, again, unbeknownst to parents, siblings, grandparents, and society and community, that same group of children who were working at the genius level at 4 years of age, by the time they were in their early 20s, only 10% of them were still at the genius level. And by the time they were 29 years of age, only 2% of them were working at the genius or brilliance level. So my question, as so many others before me has surely asked after reading this study, where did that genius level go? Was it sucked out of them by hearing all of this negativity, all of the no's, all of the thou shalt nots? And the truth is, it didn't go anywhere. It's still the light that is them. Unfortunately, it was just buried by a society that said, no, you can't do that. Color in between the lines, not on the outside. Only do this and not that. And you would think that by the time we are adults, we would be pretty good at handling this thing called no. But it ends up being the greatest, biggest fear that we have, because we feel rejected or abandoned every time we hear it. I was talking to my friend, Reverend David Alt, who is a wonderful New Thought minister. I talked to him yesterday, and I told him that I was going to be plagiarizing a little bit of what he had shared on Facebook this last week. He told a story that is an old fable about a farmer. And the farmer had one horse, and that horse in these times was considered prosperity. That horse plowed the fields. It was his transportation. It was his wealth. And everyone in the village had something like that. Unfortunately, this farmer's horse one day ran away. And the villagers came and gathered around him, and they said, "Oh, I'm so sorry this has happened. This is horrible. This is terrible news." And in a moment of awakening, that farmer said, "Maybe yes, maybe no." Interesting answer, right? That same horse, a week later, returned, just like the prodigal son. Except that horse had had a lot of fun on his week-long vacation. And he had brought home a bunch of friends. He brought with him 12 wild horses. And so the same villagers surrounded the farmer and said, "Look at this. It's amazing. This is great. This is prosperity. You are the richest man in the land." And the farmer said, "Maybe yes, maybe no. How's he going to feed them all? How is he going to break those wild horses?" His adult son, who was living with him, ended up going out into the field to try to break and corral these wild horses. And unfortunately, he got bucked off of one of them, and he broke his leg. He broke his hip. It was a horrible injury. And the villagers surrounded them and said, "Oh no, this is awful. This is horrible. How will you ever sustain your farm with this kid's broken leg? It's horrible news." And the farmer said, "Maybe yes, maybe no." A little while goes by, and war breaks out in the country. And the servicemen come to gather up all of the young men to take them to war. And they get to the farmer's house, and they notice this young man has a broken leg, a broken hip. He cannot serve. And so they leave him be, and they take all the other sons in the village to war. And the same villagers come to the farmer, and they say, "What a blessing in disguise that your son didn't have to go to war." And he said, "Maybe yes, maybe no." And war ends, but all of the sons that were taken away lost their lives. No one returned. And so this one son who was still in the village healed from his accident and ended up corralling all of these horses and sustaining the largest farm in the community that fed everyone in grief and sorrow. And they said to him, "What wonder, what possibility, what a blessing." And he said, "Maybe yes, maybe no." You know, I think about that understanding of how we label things. Yes, no, good, bad, opportunistic, fatalistic. To be able to be in that place of not creating the future story, but being in the now moment and saying, "I don't know what the future story is. Maybe it's yes, maybe it's great, maybe it's not. But this is where I stand, and I just observe, I just notice." It's that call of immediacy within our mind that we label something, that we judge, that we make up that story. And when I was talking to my friend David Alt yesterday, he used a phrase that I love. He said, "I believe it's the wisdom of the rhythm of the universe." That's almost poetic, isn't it? The wisdom of the rhythm of the universe. It's the divine patterning, what we might call divine order. And if we can lift that veil of what he called our conditioned responses, because we have been conditioned to have these responses, after you hear no 1,000 times, 500,000 times, 1,000,000 times, you become conditioned to that pattern. And what we label as good or bad becomes this hidden allegiance within us to a certain belief pattern, to a certain conditional response because we have heard no, created limitations about that, practiced it over and over, and then we pass it on to the next generation. So I asked David, how do we navigate this? And he said, "I have a new mantra I'm trying on for size, and I'm going to ask all of you to try it on for size today. It's 2 words: I'm available. I'm available to a whole list of values that has nothing to do with the outcome of a future story. I'm available to spirit. I'm available to this now moment. I'm available to my truth." Many would call that non-attachment. That's what Buddhists will teach, and that's what that farmer in that story talked about. He just became neutral in it. Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know the true answer. But that unattachment or that detachment does not mean disengagement. Can I say that again? Detachment does not mean disengagement. Rather, it means I grow more and more free from what I think it's supposed to look like, what I think I have heard and understood and therefore believed. I'm free from that conditioned response, free from what you said that I took in and believed. I told First Service I just ordered a new t-shirt that I can only wear in New Thought circles because the t-shirt reads this: I am only responsible for what I say. I am not responsible for what you understand. Isn't that great? And hundreds of thousands of times we heard no instead of yes, and we believed it. And then we spent the next X amount of years suffering from that belief system. And then we end up coming to church one Sunday and hearing this guy talk about it, and we have this aha moment where we can change our mind. I asked Joe to sing these particular songs today. I am the thinker. I have the power to change my life by changing my mind. You know, all of that change represents a lot of stuff for us, right? We have a belief system that change creates chaos. You know, if you've been sitting here for very long and have seen me on this stage, I travel a lot. Bukeka and I are on the road a lot. I've traveled more recently than probably ever before, and I have so many trips planned in my next couple of months that my now moments are a little bit chaotic. I've been in Oklahoma City this week, and Joplin, and Springfield. I teach this workshop this afternoon. I race home, try to get a few hours sleep. I have to be on a plane at 4 o'clock in the morning because I have a meeting in St. Paul, Minnesota at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then I have that meeting, and then I have to rush to another plane and fly to Duluth by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where I'll be there for the week. I have packed all of these suitcases for each of these trips because I have just enough time to get home, get a nap, get a shower, grab the next suitcase. Anyone else here know what you're wearing next Friday? I do. I am so far out of the now, it's not even funny. But that understanding that we are really hardwired for change. If you will understand that you can change your attitude, your thought, your belief, that change is chaos and bad to change is growth, and it's everything. And that impetus of change is everything because, ironically, there is something within us that doesn't want to stay stagnant or the same. Our co-founder in Unity, Charles Fillmore, talked about what that is when he said restlessness. He defined it. Restlessness is an unsatisfied longing within us. It's an unsatisfied yearning to know the divine in new and unexpected ways. And that part of us, that longing to be more in alignment with our truth, that expression of that divine wants to flow through us. And so this afternoon, we're going to be talking about all three of these words. Now, which you only think you know what that means. Come this afternoon and we'll tell you you've been wrong all of your days. And then to understand this thing called time. You know, it's been my privilege over the last many years to come to this church, stand on this stage, and speak to you whenever Sue has been taking days off or been away for whatever reason. And so it's interesting from your standpoint that I probably know Sue really well. I don't know Sue really well because she's gone every time I'm here. Doesn't that make sense? Yeah. So she trusts me to come. We don't have conversations about all of that stuff, and she told me in the beginning, I trust you. The first time I ever met Sue was at her home. I don't know if you remember this, and I was running late, which I don't like to do. And I was racing to get there for the first time we were ever going to meet. It was right after Sean had died, and she was sitting on the porch, and I drove up in my little sports car, and I raced to get everything out of my car, and I ran out, and I said, I'm so sorry I'm late. First words to someone, I'm sorry. No. Her first words to me were this: time is my best friend. Life lesson right there. Sue, I have used that so many times, and every time a meeting gets canceled in my world, every time a flight gets canceled, every time something happens that creates time, I call it my gift. And it goes around my office. We have the gift of time for this hour. to change our mindset about anything and everything. And so, as I was thinking about what to talk about today, I was thinking about my own private practice in grief therapy. You know, it's sometimes said of these feeling types, and I say that opposed to thinking types, that we have to be dragged kicking and screaming into any given now moment. And what I witnessed with grief therapy was when someone's grieving the loss of a loved one, they are more apt to be in that feeling type mode because we have to put blinders on to feel that moment because it's foreign to us, if you will. We don't have to fear that we're going to lose our memory about the past or our sense of any given future, but every now moment is ready for us to join it. And for us to be able to say, I'm available to it, is our invitation to say, I'm going to step into it. But for the present moment, that place from whence you came, that sacred ground that you just sang about, it's everything, because it's the connection to that spirit that only lives in the now. There is no past. You might have photos that say there was, but can you go back there? That's where all of our regret lies, but it's also where we define our identity. And there's no future, really, because as my grandmother used to say, worry is the greatest story of the future. So you might as well, if you're going to worry, do it later. Don't do it in the now. And so being identified with our thinking really means we derive our sense of self from that content or that activity of our mind. And as we grow up, we form this mental image of who we are, individually and collectively. And that's based on that conditioning, personal, cultural, societal, based on when you're told no versus when you're told yes, when you're told what is true versus what is the untruth. And we call that phantom self that lives outside of the now the ego. You've heard that term. My wonderful master teacher of mine once said that the ego could be an acronym, EGO, edging God out. That's a great way to think about that. We edge out the truth, the spirit, the goodness, the God of that moment. And that ego mind is always concerned with keeping the past alive. Because again, who are we without that identity? And it constantly projects itself into our future to ensure its continual survival, our salvation, our fulfillment. You know, last night, Bukeka sang a song called Happy. And I love that song because we often think about when these conditioned responses come out of us, we often say, well, when this happens, then I'll be happy. When I get this job, then I'll be happy. When I lose this weight, then I'll be happy. When I do these things, then I'll be happy. Why are you waiting? Happy lives now. And then when you are happy, trust me, everything else will unfold, because when you're happy, it's much easier to go to the gym or to grab the next healthy meal or to find that job rather than be in that discontent and then try to do it. Dr. Wayne Dyer also said each experience in your life was absolutely necessary in order to bring you here, to this moment, to this step, and to the next step. I think I've shared this story, but I'm going to share it again because it's significant. I was seeing a 7-year-old child in my private practice some years ago. He was ultra hyper, ADD, had lots going on. And so we were doing play therapy, and play therapy often involves toys or colors. My play therapy always involved food. So we had candy and cookies. Because he was hyper, I hid the candy. And we just focused on the Oreos. So we were just, doing what you do with Oreos and cutting them apart, licking the cream on the inside and talking about what he wanted to talk about. And this hyper child got still. And so still that I just joined him in that silence. And he said, wow. And then just a moment of silence, he said, I've been thinking about that my whole entire life. He's 7. My whole entire life. You know, that is the moment in which presence, the now, the time was all there. It was to recognize, to know, perhaps for the first time, his truth. And that's not a change in that moment. Rather, it's an awareness, right? It's that change that will come in the next moment based on that recognition of the awareness. There was no story about the future right then. There was no narrative about the past. And that profound need that we have within us, that soul desire, is to live in a story that's real, that's full of truth, to live in a story that has not yet been deconstructed, in a meta-narrative in which we actually understand in some profound, significant way that that which unites us is much more powerful than that which divides us. To know and to live in that shared context of meaning, that shared depth of what I call a common significance to any sacred or holy place and space that we can join. That's full of hope, peace, love. That's the greater story, isn't it? That's the meaning of life. It's the longevity of our commitment in any relationship. It's the authenticity of our voice. It is the present of being present. It's sometimes what I call grace. And so as I think about that and as I look outside, I was just telling Dee, it's so green here. I've been flying where it's already fall. But you've had a lot of rain, it's so green. But this is my favorite season, autumn, because I learn everything. Every autumn, I learn it over again. Unattached, detached, and I watch the leaves fall. And each time I do, I can simply sit in awareness and recognition that that leaf is unattaching from the tree with no fear. That's the difference between that leaf and me. That it is unattaching from the tree with no fear. And I learn how gentle that letting go can be when I'm not holding on to anything else. How beautiful and graceful that flight is of the leaf as it falls to the ground to its next evolution of its journey. To understand that it is not falling on foreign ground, but on holy, sacred ground, right beneath our feet. That's what is happening. It's both living and dying and also being reborn in each new now moment. You know, the author of the book of Acts taught us, take off your sandals. This is holy ground. This is holy ground. He wasn't just standing on a sacred site somewhere. He was standing just like you and I right here, right now, that awareness. So when we think about what is holy in our life, you might be able to identify lots of those things. But I've taught you before, we get clear on what we want and what we desire by first getting clear on what we don't want. And so when you get clear on what is holy, let's first get clear on what is the opposite of holy. And for me, the opposite of holy is the superficial. It's just that simple. It is a story other than the story of truth. It is a fabrication of what we would call right here, right now, only love. And there is that sacred calling within us that is beckoning us to that next stage of evolution for our journey. That still small voice that whispers, but it's often whispering quite loudly, that says, you know your truth. Fear not. Be still. Free yourself from anything that is unworthy of the very essence of that which you are. And there's no need to fear about any of it, whether it's death or life or relationship, any season of your life. There's no need to fear, because when you fear that, you're also fearing what is being birthed. And what is being birthed is what we would call change. But when you change your mind about what change is, there's no fear around it. And so as Bukeke was singing that song last night, Be Happy, it brought me back to the understanding that we need nothing in order to be happy about. But we do need something to be upset about. Have you noticed that difference? And so what we can gain from that is what I think the Buddha taught over and over when he said, in the end, there are only 3 things that will ever matter. how much you loved, how gently you lived, how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. And as we look at our scripture today, I thought about that understanding. And Romans says, you know what time it is. This is not a question. You know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from that slumber. And so that daily word that is on the front of your bulletin today, Dee always lets me pick them out. This is from my birthday last year. And I had no idea we would be teaching a workshop a year later about now it's time. And every season of nature and all important matters of our life is that we have the opportunity to see beyond the appearance of what seems to be, the unreal story, to recognize the wholeness, the truth of what is. And Ralph Waldo Emerson taught us that life is a journey. It's not a destination. And so we can experience that sacred, holy ground in every step, in every day, because there's no travel required for that. There's no expense that's involved. All you need is a willingness to notice, to cherish the profound, simple gifts in your life, and to be available to them. And so just as each step of our journey is necessary for us to learn and evolve as spiritual beings, each of those experiences of our life are also the opportunity to begin to trust that process. Just as Sue said, I trust you. That was huge. To say, time is my friend, that was huge for me. We're not best of friends. She's not here when I'm here. Did I mention that? But I got life lessons in that one moment that we were available to each other. And so Eckhart Tolle explains to us that the present moment holds the key to our liberation, to our freedom, but you cannot find that present moment or be in it and free as long as you are still in your ego mind, that you are still attached to something that is negative or a no in your life. And so today we're going to play, because life is this amazing playground, and our playmates are all the universal principles that are available to us. They are all of the cooperative components that have ever existed. And with no to-do list involved, with no need to fix anyone or anything in our past, to simply live in a world of infinite possibility, to have fun, to be happy, to allow peace, to ponder grace, to experience love, to affirm truth, to celebrate diversity, to honor life. And so, to the extent that we can rise into our yes, that we can rise into a consciousness of joy, into a new story, where we can step into our glory story, where we can understand that we can defy gravity and begin to learn how to soar above those limited beliefs and those conditioned responses of our life. That's the resurrection story that I don't have to wait till Easter to tell you about. It's the true story of who you are. It's the transformation and transcendent story where you say, yes, I am available now. That I am not going to live in my past, but rather I'm going to let that die, and I'm going to instead be like the phoenix. I'm going to transcend from the ashes. I'm going to step into my now because it's time. I'm going to rise. I'm going to be. I'm going to love. I'm going to live. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to have this movement of my being. I'm going to dance with the perfection of the wisdom of the rhythm of the universe.